Hi, I'm Spencer Ziegler.
Hi, I'm Mellisa Smith, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. So we're starting season 5 by revisiting a concept of data literacy. And if you remembered, we talked about that we had read this guide that was produced by the National Forum on Education Statistics back during the summer, and thought that this platform that we have would be a great way to share some tidbits with you, our listeners, of things that we uncovered. And we've done 2 episodes so far. In the first episode, we kind of discussed how data literacy is this learned skill that we all need to have because human beings, we're all encountering data all around us. So we need sort of this data to sort of draw conclusions and make decisions.
And you beat me at Jenga.
All right. Yeah. And so one of the things we tried to do is to sort of give you information in a different way. So if you remember, we played a game of Jenga to explore the 6 foundational building blocks that the National Forum says that are needed to become data literate. Spencer, what were those 6 foundational blocks?
Yep. So there was data quality, metadata, data privacy, data ethics, data governance, and then data visualization, which was the one where I pulled in, dropped the whole thing. I got confident. It was the last one, home stretch. I was feeling good. But yeah, fell down.
All right. And then in our second episode, we looked at, remember, we've been talking about this new idea of data literacy, is that data literacy is for all of us. And so in that second episode, we looked at this idea that different stakeholders would require different data literacy skills. And so we kind of shared what data literacy skills each of our stakeholders needed. And so in this episode, we're going to share some examples from some case studies in the data literacy guide. However, instead of just going through each one from all of the states, what we're going to do is we're going to share how the examples were used to support 2 of those foundational principles. We're going to look at data governance and data visualization. All right, so let's start with data governance. Spencer, do you remember what was data governance?
Oh, notes are on a different one. That's essentially the systems and structures that you put in place to make sure that everything goes smoothly, reduce the friction, some of that. How'd I do without looking?
Yeah, very good. So it's about how data is collected. So you think about things about how the data is collected, when it's collected, why it's collected, because the essential notion is that effective data governance can ensure a quality of data, which is those 2, data quality and data governance, kind of go hand in hand. All right. So what were some of the examples from our case studies to help support data governance?
So one thing that stood out to me was looking at, there's a piece, and again, it's in the show notes, so y'all can kind of read about this as well, but from Georgia's Department of Education. And they talked about the setting up the governance so it's role dependent.
Okay.
You know? So they talked about some data literacy skills, just a common baseline for everyone, but then they set up these 2 parallel paths so that educators can get the skills that they need, which kind of we touched upon a little bit in our second episode.
Yeah.
So they have 2 paths. So for education practitioners, parents, other caregivers, it's looking at the ability to look at a broad spectrum of data, incorporate them into decision making. But then a second path for data experts, where it becomes more technical about the ability to build products and services, provide support, all that kind of stuff there.
Okay, yeah.
So instead of when you're thinking about that governance of just all the things for all the people, deciding who needs what. Like Loudoun, Virginia had a similar kind of thing. They had a categorization, both split into 4. Data owners, they're the ones that, own the data. So they're overseeing their domains, setting up the business rules, considering things like access management, the use. But then there's also decision makers. So that's, ability to analyze and make decisions. There's a third category was data operators, looking at like the input of data, resolving discrepancies, making sure that things are getting submitted in a timely manner.
Yeah.
And then lastly, consumers, those that are extracting meaning from data and figuring out what to do with it.
Okay.
So those were, Puerto Rico had similar kind of things with data coaches. The case studies didn't say like, this is the right way to think about the roles, but to take a intentional and thoughtful role-dependent view when you're setting up those governance rules.
I like that.
That kind of stood out to me.
So definitely thinking first of who are the players or the users in your system.
Yeah.
And then sort of deciding what are the best practices, policies to put in place that the different users can access the data and use the data in the way that they need to use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. All right. So then we had another practice that was out there was building on high school students' data literacy skills. And so they were doing that in Pasco County in Florida, where they had piloted this program where they would show students how to develop like a research question and a plan for answering that research question. When I was thinking about this, I'm going to say this line from a song and you finish. Okay. I believe the children are our future.
I believe I can fly.
Lord have mercy.
No, I got the song, but I can't.
Teach them well and let them lead the way.
I mean, that's essentially what I was saying.
Yeah, okay. All right. Sure. All right. So we won't go into how Spencer does not know a very famous Whitney Houston line, but I say that to say that so our practice is, again, thinking about, when you said thinking about roles, thinking about who's a group in our system that we can tap into to build their data literacy skills. And so in Florida, they were looking at high school students. And if you build your high school students' data literacy skills, think of how that helps them be better consumers of data when they're moving on. So I like that idea of expanding your notion of who is your audience.
Yeah, that's just a great reminder that zoom out for the big why. Look at the strat plan, but like, oh yeah, it's about the students, and use that to kind of ground that work when you're thinking about your data governance.
Yeah, so I like that one. All right, do you have another one?
Another thing that stood out to me was just when you're thinking about the framework that you're setting up, is to build in some room for adaptability and flexibility.
Okay.
So going back to Georgia, they use this phrase, an ever-evolving skill set. I think it's important to consider that, allow it to evolve as the times and requirements for some of these different groups evolves. So they specified like AI. So how AI might change how we think of certain data literacy skills. The quote in there was, AI in education might influence the data literacy skills and PD needs for staff, might introduce a shift in the way that agencies engage with data. For example, from staff entering data into a spreadsheet to having them write queries through natural language to make meaning out of data.
Yeah.
But that it's not just AI. It could be like, if I think about early on in my career, I think my data literacy around universal screeners and diagnostics was lower, but then we see more and more of them as years go on. So you need to be able to kind of tweak and keep your data governance adaptable so that you can modify it. It's not so set in stone. So you can modify it as needed.
I'm thinking that that draws to mind for me this need to, that when you create your data governance policies and practices, that is not something that you write it. Like, what did they say? Set it and forget it?
Yeah.
It's not one of those sort of things, right? So again, as our world changes, and I think your example of it, AI, is definitely one where we have to now go back. What were our policies and procedures about? How we collect it, why we're collecting it, who sees it, all of those sort of things require us to kind of putting in a check-in every so often in your data governance plan to kind of see, okay, is it still meeting our needs?
Yep. Well put.
Okay. I think a fourth example that we saw in our cases was this need to have these defined structures. So like in Puerto Rico, they created these data teams to promote data use culture at the school level. And then they also had these data walls to promote the shared sense of purpose.
Right.
And a lot of schools use this data wall or having a data team, or even if we don't call it officially a data team, like our PLCs are like our data teams. But again, having these defined structures helps with data governance because it's not a one-off. It has some more intentionality when it comes to data governance, because it is, who doing what, why we're doing what, when we're doing it. So having these structures gives you some sort of improvement in your data governance procedures.
Yeah. I like how you touched on the underlying reason for that.
Yeah.
Because, maybe you're no longer doing a data wall, you're doing data notebooks.
Sure. Yeah.
It's really two bites of the same apple.
Yeah.
And so by thinking of it that systematically, as the initiatives might change, you're thinking about making sure that you're getting at their purpose.
I think in San Bernardino, they talked about data protocols.
Right.
But I think even though it wasn't lifted up in a lot of our examples, a data protocol is the structure that is needed, again, if you want to have that shared voice. So there definitely is a need to have structures in place.
Yep.
All right. So the next area that we wanted to touch on is on data visualization.
Mm-hmm.
And so data visualization, as a reminder, are the processes used to visually reveal the meaning of data to viewers. So Spencer, start us off with an example that you read that helps support data visualization.
Yeah, something that struck me was going back to, you mentioned San Bernardino City Unified School District in California, stressed the importance of simplifying. And I think that that's important with visualization and really with all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So they talked about like when they had these things, these key performance indicators, and there was a plethora of them. And as they started to think about visualizations and their data literacy plans, they wanted an approach for every single one of them, and they found that it was just a little bit too exhaustive, and it was kind of crushing the initiative. So instead, they took this incremental approach, which was targeted and sustainable, just focusing on a couple of these.
Yeah.
And that led to, going back to that, led to a simpler protocol, just research, recall, reflect, and respond. And that started showing up in their visualization. And I think that's important because, you think about, you need data literacy because without consciously doing these things, our brains are just going to create shortcuts and fill in some of the gap.
Correct,
Our cognitive biases are just going to kick in, all those kind of things. So the competition is our brains doing stuff immediately. So I think it's important to keep these simple because otherwise the immediate alternative is going to be somewhat compelling. So that was San Bernardino. I also like Rhode Island has a dashboard around their report cards that is again streamlined. It's just these 8 giant icons with one data point kind of highlighted. And you can dig deeper as you want, but it's starting off really simple and intuitive, and then you have the option to dig deeper instead of just being overwhelmed. And this reminded me of just like NCDPI with our teacher working conditions kind of approach.
New look. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the new look. There's a new dashboard we can drop in the show notes, and even just how it's approached, going from 199 questions to 99 questions.
Yeah.
And there are some people that were working on that project were at AIM the other week, and they talked about one of the keys in that process was saying no. And not letting everything end up in the dashboard, not letting everything end up in the survey.
Yeah.
And I think that's important with data literacy, or else it just becomes overwhelming. So that kind of struck me. Simplify.
And I know you have shared some work around how our brain works, right?
Yeah.
If you overload the brain, they can't make sense of it anyway. So this fact of thinking of the end user, who is going to be looking at this, and what do you want them to do with the information, lends itself easily like the simpler route is the best route.
Yep.
Right? Your brain can see from point A to point B, but if it has to look at C, D, F, L, it can't get from the beginning to the end because of all of the noise in between. So yes, simpler is better. And so it's good to see that it's like a shift from using data to show how smart you are to having data to like really tell a story, which is the point of data visualization.
Yeah, and that's education in general. It's not about what us at the educators are saying. It's what people are processing.
Yes.
And I think we don't consider enough just how weak our working memories are. Like my favorite example is this. Okay, I'm going to give you 4 numbers.
Okay.
All right, and just keep these
Remember,
in your
I'm
mind.
old.
Okay. 7, 4, 9, 3. Okay, just keep those in your working memory. All right, and now add 3 to each of those.
Oh, do what?
Exactly, right? That's like first grade math. Just add 3 to each. But
10, 7. How much am I adding?
Exactly. Like, so when you ask someone looking at a dashboard, when you ask someone looking at visualization to do more than essentially add 3 to 4 separate numbers, you're going to overwhelm them and they're not going to process any of that. So with a visualization, just show one thing. Don't put everything there. With a dashboard, break it into separate pages. So simplify. People can always go deeper once they process that.
Yeah.
But you need to give them
time.
Yeah. What stood out to you for this in terms of visualization?
So, I'm big on storytelling.
Yep.
And so in Loudoun County in Virginia, they incorporated these storytelling principles, such as adding a driving question into presentations.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, right? So if they were presenting on student performance, they might ask, what factors are contributing to the improvement in math scores among third graders? So that question would be right there as you're looking at the chart.
Love
I'm
it.
not like looking all over. I'm looking at the chart to figure out what are the factors.
Yeah, it's not just EOG data, years or something like that.
Yeah.
And it also taps into the brain. When you see a question, you want to know the answer.
Yeah.
And it forces you, to simplify just one thing. What can I learn from it? I like that.
Yeah. And so asking the viewer to look at the data with a purpose, again, ensures that, one, you have to make sure that the visualization answers the question.
Ooh,
so in a way, you are already going in to make sure that it's user-friendly.
Yeah.
And then again, it helps the user sort of narrow their focus, right? This is what this is saying, and I'm looking for this answer in this. So I'm not looking at, look at the red, I'm looking for this particular person.
Yeah. And I like that. That's so applicable for just the work that probably a lot of us are doing. Just when you're building that slide deck with the data, is the title just describing the data set, or is it giving a question that will be answered by the chart there?
Or telling a specific story or a point. Yeah.
Yep. And when you're telling that story, there was one other thing that stood out to me from the case studies was just that, actually going back to Loudoun, there's a phrase they use, data literacy extends beyond understanding assessment scores.
Ooh.
Just that it's going back to our conversations about multiple measures, that, the demographic data, the perception data, the process data, is an important part of that story. So like with that Rhode Island dashboard, there was contextual information for it. Or in Connecticut, there was the Meriden Board of Education.
Yeah.
They had this great phrase, whole school, whole community, whole child. And then they would collect data on that. So perception data, financial data, discipline data. So just remembering when you're visualizing that if you want to get a sense of what that story is, you need to think about the whole school, the whole community, the whole child. So Meriden kind of highlight that for me.
Yeah, I like that as well in terms of, again, you kind of have to think about, it's not just me presenting data. I also have to think of the data. What can my end user glean from the data? And also sort of take into consideration, where are they coming from? Like a lot of these talked about taking readers or users or consumers of the data and meeting them where they are and then moving them beyond. Mm-hmm. And so I think with these data visualization examples that we've discussed today, it's trying to do that, trying to figure out where your user is in that point and then take them to where you want them to go.
Well put.
All right, well then this brings us to the end of our data literacy focus series. And we hope that you, our listeners, have gleaned a new perspective on either the definition of data, the foundational blocks around data, or just some of the practices that we discussed today that can support the development. If you have any questions or comments, don't forget that you can always reach us at datalit@wcpss.net or on our website, www.wcpss.net/datalit. We'd like to thank Alex Scott for our theme music titled Dreamscapes. And until next time, bye.
Take care.